All right, ready to dig in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something everyone loves, the hamburger. I bet you've never thought much about where it came from, have you? Besides, like, your favorite burger joint, of course.
Yeah, most people probably just think of it as like classic American food. But its origins are actually a lot more surprising and a lot older than you might expect.
And that's why we're here, right? We've got a ton of research, some fascinating articles, and we're going to unpack it all. Did you know there's even a bit of a debate about who invented it first? Like, Germany and the US both kind of claim it?
Yeah, there is. And while both countries have a claim, it seems like the hamburger as we know it today, it really took root in America. I think late 19th century, right around when Coca-Cola was being invented, actually.
Oh, wow. So Coke in Atlanta and down in Texas, the hamburger, that's a wild coincidence.
It is a funny coincidence.
Yeah.
Of course, back then, they weren't pairing those two together yet. Can you imagine a burger without a Coke now?
Practically un-American. But officially, the first recorded hamburger sale was in 1900 at Louis' Lunch in Connecticut. Apparently, it's a place that had been around since 1895, according to the Library of Congress. So that kind of predates any solid evidence we have from Germany, even though they say they had earlier versions.
It is interesting. And to think, before the hamburger craze, Americans were all about the steak sandwich, which was basically a hunk of steak between two slices of bread.
Very straightforward, right to the point. So how do we go from a whole steak to a ground meat patty?
Well, ground meat was cheaper, and it could stretch a lot further. So the hamburger kind of evolved as a more, accessible option for working class folks who maybe couldn't afford a whole steak every time.
Makes total sense. It plays into this whole idea of American cuisine being, well, simple. Not super fancy, but it gets the job done.
Exactly, exactly. And there's a historical reason for that, too. See, early settlers in America, they were really focused on making money, exploiting the land for profit. Cash crops like cotton and sugarcane, those were the priority, not sustenance farming.
So they were sitting on all this land, all this potential food, but they were too busy growing things to ship overseas.
Pretty much. Which meant a lot of those early Americans, they actually faced food shortages, scarcity of basic things like grains and vegetables. And even meat wasn't always plentiful. Without established farms for raising animals, they relied a lot on hunting, especially bison.
Oh, wow, I see. So you're a settler with limited ingredients, no fancy European chefs around, and you're just trying to get by. A plain roasted piece of meat probably starts to sound pretty good, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the foundation of early American cuisine, born out of necessity.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. It's fascinating how limitations can shape what we eat. And speaking of shaping what we eat, did you know they actually accidentally invented popcorn?
I did hear about that. Found some corn, didn't know what to do with it, tried roasting the whole thing, boom, popcorn.
Amazing. But what about cornbread? Did they figure that out early on?
Well, their experiments with cornmeal for bread didn't go so well. They found it way too coarse. I guess our modern love for cornbread came later.
Interesting. So we've got these settlers focused on cash crops, not exactly living the gourmet life. But didn't England send them supplies?
Well, a lot of the early settlers, they weren't from the upper classes. Many were convicts or just ordinary folks seeking new opportunities. And England wasn't really that concerned with their culinary well-being. They're all about profits. And then, of course, the American Revolution happened. And suddenly, this new independent spirit led to an anti-British feeling. And they rejected pretty much anything associated with British culture. And that included food.
No more afternoon tea then.
Nope, no more tea. They switched to coffee, which was grown by Native Americans, and even ditched Scotch whiskey for a uniquely American whiskey made from corn whiskey, or bourbon as we know it today. Quite the statement, right?
A culinary rebellion. And speaking of American staples, we got to talk about ketchup. It's on practically every table, but it has a pretty interesting history, right?
Oh, it does. In Europe, you see, tomatoes were looked at with suspicion for centuries. Some varieties were toxic, and that bright red color, people thought they were poisonous. There were even rumors that tomatoes were aphrodisiacs, which, well, the church wasn't a fan of.
You'd think they'd be all for anything that added a little spice to life.
You'd think.
Yeah.
But over in America, it was a different story. American settlers, they didn't have a ton of food options. And remember, tomatoes are originally from South America, so they were more open to experimenting. And they came up with a, let's say, unique way of making tomatoes safe to eat. They boiled them for hours.
Boiled the fear right out of him, huh? So ketchup became popular because it was one of the few condiments readily available in a cuisine that was, well, lacking in complex flavors.
You got it. Totally different from many other cultures that, focus on balancing flavors during cooking. American food, at least in those early days, was about adding condiments at the table to change up the taste.
That explains why things like mustard and pickles, also quite sour, became so popular. They were like the original flavor boosters.
Exactly. Adding that acidity to cut through the richness of all those meat-heavy meals. And speaking of meat, let's get to the hamburger itself. Its story is actually connected to industrialization and, believe it or not, a dental dilemma.
Okay, now that's a combination I didn't expect. Bad teeth and factories, how do those lead to the hamburger?
Well, after the Civil War, the North's win led to massive industrialization. And that drew workers, including former slaves, to the factories. Suddenly, there was this need for quick, cheap, and at least somewhat nutritious meals for these workers. And the steak sandwich, it had its moments, seemed like the perfect portable food. But there was a problem. Widespread tooth loss among the working class.
Wait, so they were losing their teeth because of a bad diet?
Diet definitely played a role. The average factory worker in like the late 19th, early 20th century had only 4 teeth.
4 teeth. You can barely whistle with 4 teeth, let alone chew a tough steak sandwich.
Exactly. So while filling, the steak sandwich wasn't exactly practical. And that's where a revolutionary invention comes in. The meat grinder. It was showcased at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia.
Wait, the same expo where they debuted the telephone? Talk about a game-changing event.
Right, a pivotal moment for sure. And the meat grinder, it was about to totally change how Americans ate meat.
I'm hooked. Tell me more about how the meat grinder saved the steak sandwich.
Okay, so it allowed for really efficient processing of those tougher cuts of meat, tendons, even organs,
Right.
making them palatable and, this is key, affordable.
So ground meat, you could form it into softer patties. Way easier to chew, even for someone with, well, a limited number of teeth.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is what led to the true hamburger. Ground meat patty with all those readily available condiments, ketchup, mustard, pickles, all nestled between 2 slices of bread.
So it's like a culinary revolution born from industrialization, bad teeth, and a healthy dose of American ingenuity.
You could say that.
Yeah.
But we're still missing one piece of the puzzle. Where did the name hamburger come from?
All right, let's hear it. What's the story behind the name?
Well, the name actually takes us back to Hamburg, Germany. Back in the late 19th century, a lot of Germans were immigrating to America, and, many of them came through the port of Hamburg.
So they brought their culinary traditions with them.
They did. And ground meat patties, often with pickles. They were already pretty common in German cuisine. So Americans, associating these immigrants with Hamburg, started calling their food hamburgers. It's kind of funny, actually, because German cuisine isn't exactly known for being, delicate or refined.
Yeah, I guess that's why they might have found American food appealing. Simple, hearty, it does the job.
Could be. But it's interesting how that shared love for, unpretentious food really helped make the hamburger a part of American culture. And it's worth noting that a lot of prominent Americans actually have German roots. Albert Einstein, Bruce Willis, John D. Rockefeller, even Donald Trump. That influence is pretty widespread.
It's like a delicious cultural exchange. But the hamburger's journey to becoming this iconic food, it wasn't a smooth ride, was it?
Not exactly. See, in the early 20th century, hamburgers became super popular, and competition among vendors, it got pretty intense. And as often happens, some people started cutting corners.
Ah, so not everyone was using the best ingredients.
Unfortunately, no. The thing is, using ground meat, while revolutionary, it also opened the door for some, let's say, questionable practices. Some vendors started using low-quality ingredients, fillers, sometimes even spoiled meat, and then they'd cover it up with tons of seasoning.
Yikes, that's a recipe for disaster, literally.
It was a real issue. People were getting sick because of this lack of transparency, and it led to a growing distrust of hamburgers. But then in 1916, a new hamburger chain pops up, and their mission is to change all that.
White Castle, those iconic little square burgers.
Exactly. White Castle, they decided to address the problem head on. They went with an open kitchen concept so that customers could see the food being prepared, emphasizing cleanliness and quality.
Like saying, hey, we've got nothing to hide. Look how clean we are.
Exactly. And those white-tiled restaurants, they really played into that, purity, hygiene, to make sure the meat was cooked all the way through, no risk of undercooked patties. They even used those thin, almost wafer-like patties. And importantly, they kept prices super low, just 5 cents a burger, which is like $1 today. Everyone could afford it.
So they addressed safety concerns and kept it affordable. Smart move.
Very smart. White Castle became America's first major fast food chain, and by the 1920s, they had over 130 locations. But then, the Great Depression hits in 1929, and initially, it actually helped them because people were looking for cheap eats. But with rising ingredient costs, it became harder and harder to maintain that 5-cent price point.
And then World War II was the final nail in the coffin.
It was. With rationing, meat was being sent overseas to feed the troops, and prices skyrocketed. It was almost impossible for White Castle to keep up that low-cost model. Plus, with so many men off fighting, there was a huge labor shortage, which made things even tougher.
So White Castle, once the Burger King, was struggling to survive. But I have a feeling this is where the McDonald brothers come in, right?
You got it. They saw an opportunity in this struggling market. But their approach, it was completely different, and it would end up changing the whole fast food industry as we know it.
Okay, tell me everything. What did the McDonald brothers do that was so different?
Well, first off, they realized they needed to get rid of the need for skilled chefs who were in short supply during the war. So they came up with a system using pre-prepared ingredients and a simplified assembly process. Anyone could put these burgers together.
It's like an early version of the assembly line, but for hamburgers. That's brilliant.
It was. And to keep things efficient and costs low, they switched to disposables, paper wrappers instead of plates. No dishes, no hassle.
Streamlined and cost-effective. But meat was expensive and hard to come by, so what about the actual burgers?
That's where they got really clever. They shifted the focus away from the patty and made French fries the star of the show. Plus, they took advantage of the popularity of Coca-Cola, making it the perfect drink to go with the meal. Burgers, fries, and Coke, that classic combo was born.
They knew their audience. And you know what else was brilliant? Ditching White Castle's square patties and introducing that perfectly round burger bun we see everywhere today.
It's become like this symbol of McDonald's, hasn't it? But they didn't just want to be different. They also made their burgers a little more expensive, 15 cents compared to White Castle's 5. But they had thicker patties, so it was like a premium but still affordable option.
So they gave customers more for their money, which, during wartime, with everyone wanting value, was a genius move.
It really was. And it's amazing to think how those decisions, made during those tough wartime years, shaped the entire fast food world for decades to come. Their innovative approach and business smarts, they built the foundation for the McDonald's empire we know today.
It's incredible to think that a food with such humble beginnings, born out of necessity, influenced by the economy, even dental problems, could become a global phenomenon.
It is. The hamburger is more than just food. It represents American adaptability, our ingenuity, even our love of a good deal.
So true. And it makes you wonder, why has the hamburger, with its kind of messy, unconventional origins, become this universally recognized symbol of American culture?
That's a great question. Is it the simplicity, the way you can customize it to fit any taste or budget? Or maybe it's because it represents this fusion of cultures, a mix of flavors and influences, kind of like America itself.
I think it's all of those things, It's like this perfect storm of history, economics, and culinary creativity that came together to create something truly unique and lasting. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really mind-blowing. Next time I grab a burger, I'm going to think about all this.
I think that's what I love about these deep dives. We discover all these hidden stories and meanings behind things we see every day. Totally. We started with a bunch of research and articles about the hamburger, and look where we ended up. Bison hunting settlers, ketchup-loving Germans, the Great Depression, fast food empires. It's amazing. Who knew the hamburger had such a crazy history?
It really shows how food, it's not just about eating, right? It's a reflection of culture, the economy, even technology.
I love that. So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this deep dive?
I think it's the realization that even something as simple as a hamburger, it has this incredibly rich and complex history. It's a story of innovation, adaptation, and the merging of cultures.
And it reminds us that the foods we enjoy today, they're a product of so many historical events and decisions. Makes you appreciate that juicy burger even more, huh?
Definitely does. And who knows, maybe they'll inspire some of our listeners to do some digging of their own. What other everyday foods have these surprising origin stories?
Now there's a challenge. So to our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and of course, keep enjoying those delicious burgers, knowing now just how much history is packed into every bite. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.